Alright, welcome back. Thought I'd do another one of these readings. Today I'm reading from a anonymously authored Turkish chronicle, but this time moving a little ahead from the two Arab chronicles about the Crusade. This is from the late 15th century, so the ill-fated Crusade of Nicopolis, and this was declared under Pope Eugene the Fourth, or Eugene the, excuse me, made a mistake. Eugene the Fourth. In 1443, they're sensing, at this time, the Christian states are sensing that the Ottomans, under Sultan Murad II, are kind of in a weak position in 1443, and so in 1443, 1444, they decide to march into the Ottoman Empire and confront them. And this is where you get John O'Shunyadi is one of the main heroes at this time, among a number of others. And I reviewed a book about this period by the author's name is John Jefferson, The Holy Wars of King Vladislaus and Sultan Murad. So if you want more information on that, you can read that book. I highly recommend it. You can find it online. The print copy is extremely expensive, unfortunately. And of course, watch my review, but highly recommend it. But today I'm reading from this translated chronicle, translated by Collin Imber, so he's kind of a famous Ottoman historian. The Crusade of Varna, 1443 to 45. It's part of a series, Crusade Text and Translation. It was published in 2006, but I'll put the publication information will be in the description if you want to find it. Not going to read the whole thing like all the way through, but I will read. So we'll start with an account of how the castle called Vidin came under siege. Meanwhile, the infidels, who are as low as dust, advanced as far as Vidin, where they pitched their tents. Then the evil-doing king ordered the siege of the castle, and as the infidels advanced to occupy the ditch, the people of Vidin took refuge in God with the cry of Allah, Allah, sallied from the castle with drawn swords. They struck those accursed men with such force that within a short time they had driven the infidels, who are as low as dust, back toward the king. When the accursed man, called Yanko, saw what was happening, he said to the king, "Give the command to me, your slave, and I will reduce the castle of rubble and tip it into the Danube." The evil-doing king thought for a bit and then gave his reply. "Very well, I know that you are capable of this, but the garrison will not surrender the castle so easily. It would mean that we would have to stay here for a few days, while our aim is to reach Edirne as soon as possible and seize the city while the son of Osman is off his guard." And I'll just stop here for a little parenthetical note. This is several years before the sack of Constantinople, so at this time Edirne is the capital of the Ottoman Empire. So anyway, after that, the castle will be ours for the taking. I admit it is wrong to spare these castles, but if we delay here, the son of Osman might somehow or other cross the sea to meet us. Then we will be in trouble. But if we occupy Edirne, the son of Osman will not dare attack us. When he had spoken, they withdrew the infidel troops and did nothing. When they saw this, the warriors of Islam returned victorious to the castle. They placed cannon, arquebusiers, and mangonels on the turrets and walls, raised red flags at every corner, and kept a close watch in the direction of the infidels, all the time saying, "God is one, God is one." Next day the infidels departed with much pomp and ceremony. Meanwhile, the black news had reached the pashas in Edirne. They consulted together and told the prince what was happening. "My padishah," they said, "the infidels who are as low as the dust are already in Sarajeli." When the prince heard this, he asked what should be done. Each person said his piece, but it was the prince who gave his command. "Inform my father immediately and bring him here by whatever means is possible, because we must go against these infidels. But Edirne must not be abandoned. One of us must stay here, and one of us must go." Letters were written immediately, and Mahmud Pasha mounted his horse and set off to the Sultan Murad Khan. One day he reached His Majesty the Padishah, the refuge of the world, and explained to him everything that had happened. He begged and entreated him, but because the Padishah had no intention of crossing over to Rumelia, Mahmud Pasha implored him even more strongly until finally, when he told him of the tricks of the emperor, that the emperor had perpetrated, His Majesty the Padishah consented and said, "Go now and pray for my son. Halil Pasha should come with my infantry slaves to meet me at the spot called Guksu." Then Kashabolu Mahmud Pasha again kissed the ground before the Padishah said, "My Padishah, be so gracious to direct a letter to your son and to the Pashas so that they will believe what I say and rejoice." The Padishah gave the command for letters to be written and sent Mahmud Pasha on ahead. Mahmud Pasha mounted his horse and set off. Meanwhile, the Pashas and lords assembled to discuss the situation. Everyone said their piece, and finally, looking at Chavush Bey in the face, said, "Chavush Bey, you are an old slave of the Padishah and have seen many things. You are the old wolf in our midst. What should we do in this situation? You tell us." Chavush Bey raised his head and said, "I know this much. The enemy who is attacking us is extremely powerful. The first thing we must do is to gather workmen together and set them digging a ditch around the whole circuit of Edirne. We should channel water into the ditch wherever this is possible, surround the citadel with water on all sides like a billowing sea. Next, we should station forces, in every district to cut off the defiles the enemy must pass through, and assemble at the ready all the troops of Anatolia and Rumelia. Next, we should alert the people in the towns and villages around the city and bring them into the citadel. We should procure and prepare sustenance for all the Muslims who are going to come into the fortress. Without people, stones and mortar do not make a castle. However many people there may be, they are of no use without food. This much we know. For the rest, it is up to you to act as you think best." With this, he fell silent. So the prince gave the command to dig a ditch around Edirne to let the people all around and to bring them into the city. God is the greatest of the great. Within a short space of time, they collected together men who dug a ditch, which words cannot describe. At the same time, they alerted the people of the district, and brought them into Edirne, busying themselves with the provisions and preparing such stores they required. However, when Shahin Pasha and Halil Pasha removed their own property and provisions from Edirne to the castle of Dimetoka, the people of Edirne began to mutter. They gathered around the Pashas and said, "Why are you doing this? What do you think you are doing, removing your property and provisions to Dimetoka? What can we poor folk do? Where can we go?" At this, the Pashas replied to the people, "We are men of affairs. We have removed some property and provisions because nobody knows what is going to happen, and we may well need an outer treasury. You are slaves and subjects resident in this city, and what you need to do is bring all your property and provisions from the outside and fight manfully for the religion of Islam." Sort of an interesting answer. Anyway, nobody is going to tell you to leave this castle, but we face 1,000 different responsibilities. We might be told to go, and it may not be possible to come in again. In that case, what do you imagine we would do when we need provisions which are now outside? However, this was not the Pasha's real intention in removing their property and provisions. They had removed them simply so they would not be there if the infidels captured the citadel. In the meantime, the prince had issued a command and sent letters to the Qadis in every district. "Whoever of you has members of the military residing in the area of jurisdiction, whether janissary, armor, gunner, holder of a zemat, or timar, mutaferika, or chavush, you should quickly, without delaying for a single day or hour, levy military personnel from 1 to 1,000, from 1,000 to 10,000, and send them to the plain of Edirne. Furthermore, you should have great trees felled and block each and every defile along the path the infidels, who are low as the dust, he should act in no other way. He sent these commands to all districts, and in accordance with the Padishah's decree, they issued orders to fell great trees and block each and every defile in the path of the infidels who were as low as dust. At the same time, the prince decreed that each of his slaves should be paid his salary, and each one honored and clothed in sumptuous garments according to his station. As a result, every man knew what his function was, and they stood like Alexander's dam, each one ready for duty. And I'll just pause here briefly. When they say the prince's slaves, obviously they don't mean like a chattel slave like we would think of in American history. This is a sort of a traditional Muslim term, the direct servants of, in this case, one of the crown princes is called a slave. So, anyway, but now our story returns, continuing with the reading, but now our story returns to the vizier Mahmud Pasha, who had gone to His Majesty the Padishah, the refuge of the world, and brought back letters from him. When the news reached Edirne that Mahmud Pasha had returned from His Majesty the Padishah, the refuge of the world, the viziers, deputies, and notables of the province went out to meet him and brought him into the presence of the prince. Mahmud Pasha placed the Padishah's letters before the prince, and they were read out at his command. This is what the letter said. Let us see what you can do. You should assemble the troops of Islam and take care to procure their food and provisions. You should send my Lala, Halil Pasha, to meet me as soon as possible with my infantry slaves and a quantity of cannon and gunners. You should rendezvous with me at the palace known as Guksu. With this he concluded the letter. The prince and all the lords rejoiced. They collected their wits and began to make serious preparations. The prince gave the command, assigning gunners with a quantity of cannon and ammunition to Halil Pasha, sent him to meet his father. With the words, "It is for the Sultan to command," Halil Pasha set off from Edirne to meet the Padishah. In the meantime, the Rumelian soldiers had arrived, troop after troop, rank upon rank, and bowed their heads before Halil Pasha. Now Ferez Beyoğlu had also captured 2 informants from the infidels who were as low as the dust. They brought them to Halil Pasha's council, and he interrogated them. These informants stated, "My Sultan, the goal of our king is Edirne, and he is coming to take the city." On the Pasha's command, he took the 2 informants to the palace. At the same time, he richly rewarded the men who had brought the informants, assigning them timars, sending them on their way. He himself left with all the Janissaries, gunners, armors, and troops of Rumelia. Set off straight to the river Kopisa to meet the Padishah, the refuge of the world. But now our story returns to the infidels who are as low as the dust. On the day they left Vidin, they marched off with great pomp and ceremony. Now those accursed and faithless men marched on, pillaging Rahova and Lofcha on the way. So I'll pause here a minute and give some commentary. Again, this is from the Turkish point of view, so obviously not very friendly to the Christian knights. You see this a lot in Ottoman writings, the evil-doing king or the accursed king to describe whoever happens to be in charge. Usually it's the Habsburg emperors, but in this case, King Vladislav, I believe, is who they're referring to. But just as a point of pointing out some of the interesting military aspects, so they clearly have, the Ottomans at this time have arquebusiers and artillery that they mention. Let me see if I can find that place again. Yes, so we have Janissaries, obviously those are the elite professional infantry. This time, 15th century, probably mainly carrying swords, I would guess, but I'm sure there's probably gunners. There's the Armorer Corps, which I need to do some more research on because I think that would be an interesting video topic in and of itself. But they did fight in the 16th century, but they were armors, like in a modern military. And gunners is the artillery corps. I can't remember the proper title, but yes, the Royal Artillery, basically. And then a few of these other designations, Holder of Azimat or Timar. Those are the feudal sort of cavalry. I've talked about those in some of my Ottoman wargaming videos. The Timariyat cavalry, as opposed to the Kapakulu, or household cavalry, we could say. Um, there's the Mutaferika, which are more sort of like a ceremonial unit in some ways, but it even says in the notes here, in the text, a member of a corps of officers in the Ottoman palace made up of the sons of office holders and other dignitaries. So at this time they're quite strong and probably serious cavalrymen. In the later 16th century, when the Ottomans have some problems, they kind of decline in quality, and it's sort of a what's the word phrase? Kind of a favor, sort of here, my son's going to be in the Mutaferika now. Is he a good soldier? Not really, but the Sultan owes me a favor, basically. Sort of a long-winded way of putting it. And Chavush, that's just the sergeants. So that's some of these various Ottoman military terms. And I think the answer that the two pashas give to the people, we are men of affairs, so basically telling them to, you're out of luck, we're in charge, and we can do what we want, as so often happens in history. But I guess my main point, so here's another aspect of Ottoman military science that was quite good. They were very good at engineering. So this whole plan of Çavuş Bey being the senior sort of soldier, explaining what they should do to defend Edirne, build this defensive sort of structure. So even in the 15th century, we can see that to a certain extent, having these pitched battles is kind of not always effective. And the Ottomans were able to sort of recognize that, the value of defensive fortifications, and musketeers and artillery. I'd have to do some other research, but I would be interested to see at this time approximately how many arquebusiers that they're fielding, because by the time of Mohac, even they have. The Janissaries are quite mostly musketeers, I believe. So it's kind of an interesting. This is an area of Ottoman history I'm not super well versed in, so this was interesting to read even for me. Checking how I'm doing on time. I think I'll pause here and I'll pick up with another separate video, an account of how the infidels who were as low as dust came to Nikoblu and were defeated. So this is the famous or infamous defeat of the Crusaders, the Varna Crusade at Nicopolis. So I'll read this as well in a separate video. It's not that long, but this video's kind of been going on for a little while. So anyway, so I thought this was an interesting source to read. I hope if you're interested in doing war games around this period, this was helpful. There's also a book, and pick up that book I recommended, Holy Wars of Sultan Murad and Vladislav. Very interesting, and it covers this in more detail. And I discussed it in the review, but the author of that book, the guy's name is Jefferson. He read Burgundian sources, he read the Turkish sources, believe Latin, of course, and I think Italian, but a lot of research went into that, but Polish as well. But anyway, that book is really well researched, and I strongly recommend you check it out if you're interested in sort of the earlier period, the Hungarian and Ottoman Wars. Quite interesting. So yeah, anyway, I think I'll go ahead and wrap the video up here. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.